Okay, I think we are live. So, welcome everyone. I am so delighted to have Janice Hulse as my guest today. We are discussing the third chapter of life. Janice was the author of a book that I really resonated with called The Age of Freedom: Women at the Crossroads of Career and Change. And Janice wrote the book along with her friend and former colleague, Janet Gregory, who has written a number of books and who I am so excited to meet sometime. So I was introduced to Janice by our mutual friend, Lynn Harrison. And I'm so excited and honored to be here with you live, Janice. Janice is also a coach, a lifelong learner, and a community leader. She lives in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. So, Janice, I'd love to start off and ask what inspired you in writing Age of Freedom, which speaks about the third chapter of life so beautifully, and encountering change and embracing life's many detours.
Well, first of all, Jane, I am so delighted and honored to co-host this broadcast with you and also learn about, what you've been doing and some of the wonderful programs you offer. But what really inspired me in writing this, it began a few years ago. You mentioned Janet's name. We were sharing the paths that our careers both took. And we were both at a crossroads, actually, when you think about the crossroads of change for professional women. Janet was thinking about winding down her very successful consulting practice. And I was really ready to leave the corporate world. We both had professional and personal reasons. But we were also wondering what were other women thinking about and where their lives would lead. So the idea about writing a book started to germinate. But we didn't just want it to be, the world of Janet and Janice. So we launched a survey and we wanted to ask professional women what they thought about retirement and the changes that their careers took or even their personal lives. We had amazing, Jane. We had over 650 women respond to our survey. It was outstanding. And that became the foundation of Age of Freedom. So thinking about the work that you do to inspire people, I'm really interested in your program, Thriving in Retirement. What inspired you to create that, Jane?
Oh, well, thanks for asking. I really created the course because I'm passionate about helping people transcend barriers and live life to its fullest, not just the last third of life, but all of life. And I've always been so fascinated with how life turns out for people. I was in human resources for over 35 years, and I've been able to observe people's life paths over decades of time. And as a business leader like you, I've hired and coached thousands of leaders in my life, and it's been an education watching different life trajectory. So, for example, somebody that I hired as a trainee became a CEO 30 years later. And then, I've observed really confident, successful executives retire and then really struggle. And so it's interesting seeing that. And I love helping someone think through life-changing decisions as they learn how to balance everything, family and career, and their own sense of purpose. And of course, my wish for everyone is that life could always be a rising arc that just keeps getting better and better, despite all of the challenges that can come up. Now, I'm so inspired by people who seem to be on a path to greater and greater fulfillment, even as they age, even as they face whatever surprises life has in store. They're living their dreams, sharing their passions, staying creative and vital, making a difference in the world like you did writing your book. And yet I've seen too many people who hit retirement and really flounder. And that's what gave me the inspiration, the impetus to create the course. That ability to thrive is what I want for myself, for everyone I love. And that's what I want for the people who enroll in the Thriving in Retirement course. So that's why I created the course.
Fantastic.
But I'd love to ask you, how do you talk quite a bit with Janet in the book about redefining or enhancing personal identity as you go through these chapters of life. Can you share more about your observations and your tools?
Absolutely. And before I do that, Jane, I wanted to comment that when you were sharing the elements of your program and the passion, it's really non-gender specific, is what I'm hearing, right? And even though Jan and I, our subtitle is Women at the Crossroads of Career and Change, we've had many men and other gender non-specific people read the book and get inspired. So I did want to point that out. It's our book, while it touches on discussions and stories with women, it's really for everybody that's looking to understand where their career takes them. And it really starts to kind of answer your question. It depends. It really is where are you in your current relationship with your work world, right? So that's the first thing. We use the term in the thick of it. Are you just pounding away 7 days a week, 40 plus hours? Or are you working on your own terms because you've set some framework and structure? Because making an income is still relatively important to you. But no matter where you are in the relationship with the work world, we talk about letting your reach exceed your grasp, which is kind of aligned to when I hear about what your program has to offer. And we have a chapter called Let Your Reach Exceed Your Grasp. And it helps examine the opportunities before you, both professional and personal. And it shares stories of women that have gone different paths and have actually realized, this is who I am, or what my personal identity is, and how it relates to the work world and how it relates to my lifestyle. But one of the very basic tools, you're kind of going to groan a little bit when I say that, is asking the 7 questions. The proverbial 7 questions: who, what, where, when, how, and how much, both in your professional and your personal life. And really being true to yourself and answering those. And that starts helping you, I would say, either realize who you are, what your personal identity is, or where you strive and where you want to go with it. There's no right answers, right? Because we're all different. And we won't have a lot of time to talk about it, but in the book, when we talk about tools, there's a chapter about what the heck do I do now?
I love that chapter.
Thank you, Jane. And we explore actually what your next looks like. Wouldn't it be cool if we had a crystal ball and could say, okay, Janice, fast forward 5 years from now, this is where I'm going to be? Not so true. So we came up, this was kind of really cool. We came up with a personal management formula. And it starts with defining your core values. And I'm sure, Jane, that you talk a lot about core values in courses, not only in Thriving in Retirement, but they're the fundamental principles that guide you, your inner strength and your conduct. And then the next step is examine where you really are. Do your own personal investigation. So you've got your core values, examine where you really are, and then start building your development plan. We're all professional careers. How many times have we built a development plan? But you need to build one for yourself, whether you want to leave that being in the thick of it, moving into my own terms, or getting out of the paid work world. So your development plan will guide you, and it can be dynamic as your personal goals or as your aspirations change. So when you bring these 3 elements together, it creates a powerful intersection of activity and purpose. We had a real fun doing this chapter.
I could tell. I mean, it came through. And I also loved reading all of the different spectrum of examples, from your 650 people that responded to your survey. I just thought that was amazing reach.
Well, speaking of tools, and you mentioned this earlier too, when you and I were getting to know each other, you use the tools of meditation and creativity to help people get to know themselves more fully. Can you also share, Jane, how these tools can help someone get clear on their own identity as well? Because I'm really interested in that part.
Yeah, absolutely. So creativity is part of the Thriving in Retirement program because I believe that a creative life is an amplified life. So creativity is within everyone. It's part of being human. And some people feel reluctant to experiment creatively. But when you open up to self-expression, it becomes exciting. And most people, I've learned, peak in their creative genius at 5 years old. And in working with adults, I now understand that you can easily reclaim that creative potential within you. You just have to be open enough to try. And we even do something, we take our class notes in an art journal. And it's a very simple thing, but it also reminds you that you are creative. And so just the idea that you're using an art journal, some people don't do much other than take notes, and some people, do quite a bit in the art journal, but it just reminds you that you are creative, and it sort of opens that gate. In terms of why meditation is part of the course, learning to thrive, you mentioned this about talking about the introspective tools that you and Janet featured in the book. It's really an inner journey. And when your mind is distracted or you're under pressure, it's hard for expansive thinking to really flow. Your thinking is restricted. Mindfulness meditators learn to be in the moment, deeply notice this moment, not the past, not the future, right now, this moment. And when you finally learn to pay mindful attention in meditation, that skill unleashes your ability for creativity, for self-expression, for inner work, for transformation. So after I retired, I became a Chopra certified meditation coach. But even before that, I'd been meditating myself. Now I've been meditating now for over 25 years. And after I retired 8 years ago, I became really committed to my practice. And so I've had a twice a day meditation practice since retiring. And I've really noticed changes in myself. And also as a meditation coach, I see how quieting your mind can be such an enormous catalyst for positive change in life. And I've learned that regular meditators have tremendously fulfilling lives. So that's why meditation is part of the course. It's made such a big impact on my life, and I want to share that experience with other people.
Thank you, Jane. So, wow, that creative journal got me thinking. There's the bullet journal.
Yes.
Which bullet journal is more structured framework.
Yes.
It has a professional approach, if you will. But the creative journal, that goes a lot more deeper. And I love it. I'm going to start this creative journal because, I'm just so excited about what you shared. And the meditation and the work that you've done there, one of our chapters talks around what's happened with COVID.
Yes.
And Janet and I, we were plugging along, putting together our manuscript and our chapters. And then COVID hit, and I said, Janet, let's write a chapter on COVID because
I thought you just wove that in beautifully.
Thank you. It created so much change. And when I think about and how you talk about meditation and how so many of us struggled during that time and still are, how that can become such a wonderful asset to overcome some of these things we can't control, right? Because we can't control that. So I just really love what you just shared that way. And I can just see so many linkages in terms of what Janet and I wrote and how that fits with.
I know. I mean, when I read your book, it was like so many synergies. Well, it inspired me so much. And I wasn't done creating the course. And it really made me stop and have some additional insights. So I can't thank you both enough for that. Also, I wanted to ask you, in your book, one of your chapters is about leaving the paid work world. Mm-hmm. And you tell stories about so many women making their own discoveries about retirement. And I'd love for you to share some of those findings.
Okay, this was real fun. So in the survey, and what we did in the survey, it was structured so that depending on where you were, it would pivot to another set of questions, right? And that helped. And Janet is just amazing at pulling data together and just piecing all these things. But we asked women 2 questions. We asked the magic question, what do you wish you knew in advance? Mm-hmm. And these were for women or professional people that have left the paid work world, and they're now in the phase of retirement. And the second question was the surprise. What was the big surprise, right? And we had so many cool stories, but we discovered there's just no easy button, you know. Yep, what do I know I wish in advance? One big thing, or there was one single magic answer, because it was a combination of everything. Structure, reinvention, preparation, timing, and partnership. And depending on where you were, some were heavily weighed versus others. And I'd love to, can I just read a few
Yeah,
for you
please.
from the book? Here's the book, as you know. And I'm just going to flip over here to, so the magic question. There's an impact to having no defined schedule or time demands. 1/5 of the women commented on how daily demands change. And here was a really good insight. Beware, what you used to do in your spare time now takes all day. And some women missed the structure. They gave themselves permission not to accomplish 20 goals per day. It's okay. And how many day-to-day things there are to do, and how wonderfully unrushed the days can be. So that was really, really fascinating on structure. And it's about flexibility and not being controlled by the clock, and how women, or women that responded, said, I love making my own schedule. I'm not beholden to anyone anymore, right? And this can go to, imagine now this creative journal that you talked about, Jane. I can now schedule in my time at 4 o'clock, I'm going to sit down and put a pen or crayon to paper and just put down what comes to my mind. I can schedule that because that's something important to me. There were other things that, we talk about reinvention. And people were finding, women who had started their own practices and leaving it behind, they were still ready to sell their company, despite that they loved it, but they also loved their new life.
Yeah.
So it's about all these discoveries. And the biggest surprise, or I wish I knew what women said, I'm going to pull some out, was I discovered brave new directions. I discovered hobbies or talent I thought I never had. And I know you're going like that because, I know you were sharing with me one of your clients, a mutual friend of ours, who has this incredible talent of creating artistic work.
She's fearless. I mean, she's just amazing. You should see what she produces. And she would have never called herself an artist.
Exactly. And this is what women have told us. And they found a new career, whether that's being the new artist. One of our women, who, Mary Gosby, who shared her story, she is a professional songwriter. And she was, in the thick of it. But at the end of the day, women came back and said, it is so important to have a sense of purpose. Because if you don't have a sense of purpose, then the activity you do is meaningless. And so those, I could spend another half hour on this, but I won't. But those were some of the wonderful stories. And every quote or every story we got, it would give me an aha moment. And it would cause me pause to reflect. So thinking about that, Jane, and in your Thriving course, you talk about the implications of longevity. Mm-hmm. What is it you think people should consider as they start to think about finding meaning and fulfillment in that chapter of life?
Yes. Well, in my research for the course, as I was doing the longevity research, I started really thinking about, what if you live to be 110? Because it's starting to feel routine these days to see articles about supercentenarians. The longest lived lady that we know of lived to be over 122 years old. So Jeanne Calment in France lived to be 122, and Kane Tanaka in Japan lived to be over 119. So it's estimated that there are between 150 and 600 people that have already reached the age of 110. And so there are a lot of implications. You might have a really lot of productive decades ahead. So if somebody retires when they're, say, 60, they could easily have 30, 40, 50 more years to live. And, it's exactly what you were just talking about. The big question is, how will you live? Will you live your purpose? Will you live a fulfilled life? How will you spend those years to make the most of your time and make the biggest impact? Will you thrive? And will you cultivate well-being through all of those potential decades? Have you really done the inner work to know yourself, to find your purpose? Retirement's a time to create life as you want it to be, life on your terms, doing what you want, living your dreams, filled with energy, filled with excitement. So the big takeaway for me is that you can create the rest of your life as you want it to be, but it takes some work. It doesn't just happen. You have to create your life the way you want it to be. So I think there are huge implications for longevity, and to really take advantage of that time. People are living longer and they're feeling better, and they're acting way younger than than whatever age actually shows up on the calendar. So I want to ask you, how do you really define happiness and wellness?
So that was a chapter that I personally struggled with because we all have our own point of view on what happiness and wellness is. And there's just a plethora of resource books out there that talk about it and define it. But I believe that regardless, happiness is a key component to living a full life. I mean, you talk about those women, the longevity. They probably had very interesting lives, but they were happy with what they've accomplished and continue to be. And wellness, the other piece of that, is intrinsically connected to one's happiness. So it's a balance of both. And wellness, in my kind of thinking, Jane, it's an active pursuit linked with choices that you make and actions that lead us to hopefully living an ideal state of health and well-being. But I differentiate, or at least we talk about in the book, we differentiate wellness from healthcare, because healthcare is actually how we take care of ourselves. And sometimes our health is not in our control.
Right.
And it can, create some very difficult moments and sadness. And there's also that burden of external factors of healthcare that impact our ability to having a full life. One of the fascinating things that Jen and I found is that she lives in the United States and I live in Canada, and a lot of women who responded, because it was a global survey, our healthcare systems are very different depending on where we are. And so that's very difficult to control, but women will have made choices so that they can make sure that whatever they decide, that at least that piece of healthcare is something that they can hopefully manage, and maybe even have to change or move geographically to get that. So a story that I didn't share in the book, I was on a business trip to India, and I was leaving Singapore at that time to go on this trip. And we had to stop because we didn't make the connection. So we ended up at this little hotel, and I walked into the lobby. And as I was walking into the lobby, I noticed all of these monks. And I said to my business colleague, I said, Wing Ho, I said, what's happening here? This is quite interesting. It might be a convention, because I put my professional hat on. Well, the Dalai Lama was there.
Oh.
And we walked in, and I went, oh my goodness. I went to the elevator bank, and he was there, standing with his beautiful entourage. And he looked at me, and I had just lost my father. He had died 6 months earlier. And I went up to him and I said, I am so humbled to be here in your presence. And he
Absolutely.
took my hand and he said, my dear, you have discovered pain, but you will be richer because of it.
Oh my God.
And Wang Ho, yeah, and I said, you have to come back and tell my colleagues because nobody will believe me. And that to me was, I know I deviated a little bit from the healthcare, but when I think about the wellness and the spirituality that I encountered in that moment is something I will never forget. So, boy, that was a moment of true happiness and well-being that I will hold cherished to my heart.
Oh my
So
gosh, I have goosebumps. I mean, that was amazing. Of course you missed your flight, and of course
it's
you were there at
there,
that
there
hotel.
maybe there was a reason.
Of
Um,
course.
and so you talk a lot about well-being, Jane, and you wrote a book called Vision Quest: A Journey to Happiness, which I have just ordered and I'm going to be anxious to read.
Thank you.
So, what are some of the insights that you discovered with the increased states of well-being?
Well, I studied with some amazing teachers as I went on what I call my vision quest. And one of the most profound things that I learned is that you can increase your happiness and joy in life. Scientists have discovered that people do have a genetic set point, which accounts for about 50% of our happiness. And I really found it fascinating that some part of happiness is determined by genetics. And yet, the more I thought about it, it made sense to me because there are people who tend to look at the world with more positivity throughout their whole life and others who don't. And that outlook seems to be a deep and enduring part of them. But I found it shocking to learn that only 10% of your happiness level is dictated by your life circumstances. I thought it would be a much higher percentage of that. And so, digging into some of that and to understand the relationship between money and happiness, is fascinating. We talk about some of the implications of that in my course. But the big exciting finding to me that made me really stop and think is that a whopping 40% of your happiness can be changed by intentional activity. So, in thinking about that, I thought that was amazing. You can change your happiness level. How? Well, relationships, philanthropy, optimism, savoring moments, mindfulness, physical activity, spirituality, self expression, and pursuit of goals. And so you might ask, well, if there's a formula to increase happiness and the pathway to do that is known, then why doesn't everybody do it? And I would ask the same question. It's like, okay, yes, the pathway is known. You can do this. So what's stopping you? So I think that's incredibly exciting. And yet, you brought up the Dalai Lama. So I have to say that he does make a distinction between happiness and joy. And happiness are those fleeting feelings of well-being. The Dalai Lama says happiness is like a butterfly that lands on us and then flutters away. Joy comes from within. It's more enduring and it persists no matter the circumstance. So you can find joy even in pain. Joy is that deep feeling of contentment. You cultivate it over a lifetime. It can even be born from suffering. And I think the third chapter of life is a time for cultivating joy. And you really get it by doing the deep inner work, clarifying and living your purpose, having a regular meditation practice, being creative, playing, taking some risks, seeing what you could do. How can you impact the world? Happiness is more about getting what you want in the moment. It's more momentary. So yes, I seek happiness in any given moment, but what I really hope to cultivate, and I got this so much from your book too, is just cultivating that sense of ongoing joy. And I think that's so synchronistic that you talked about the Dalai Lama.
Well, I just loved, boy, you just nailed it when you define happiness and joy. And I never thought of it that way, Jane, but they are distinctly different in a way, but yet they're intertwined. And I wrote a story about my moment in cloud nine, which now made me realize in what you shared, that was a moment of happiness, right? yes, it brought me joy, but it was at that period, at that time. And I wished I'd known you before, because I probably would have interviewed you about happiness and joy. And let's just stay tuned for the next sequel.
Let's stay tuned. That's right. I love that. So your book talks about the different relationships women have with the work world. And do you think it's linear, the process toward retirement?
No, not at all. We don't think so, at least. We had many wonderful discussions on this, Janet and I, and also other women that we talked with and interviewed with. And Janet, I'll give her credit, she came up with this. We believe it's similar to a DNA helix. It moves constantly, right? But we like to think it moves forward and sideways, but never backwards. Because if you see how that flow goes, it's always going in one direction forward. And for women, for some women that have moved from the thick of it, like hard charging corporate jobs, self-made, and they go to working on their own terms, some of them have found, I don't really like that. I'm going to go back, not back, I'm going to move sideways and go back into the thick of it and try to balance that.
Yeah.
We found that some of those women that did that, they missed that structure. Remember I talked about structure before? They missed that structure. They couldn't create their own structure. But women that have moved directly into retirement from the thick of it, into the paid work world, relish it. But here's the other thing, right? The word retirement. We had a few women that vehemently said, don't call it retirement. No way, it's not retirement. It's what I choose to do, whether it's on my own terms or giving back to the community. And one thoughtful woman called it rewirement.
I love that too. Yeah, I have a section on you inspired me. I have a segment on that, and I did my own survey on that, and I've gotten so many cool names that people have come up with.
And you know, it's funny because
Happy Mint.
There's this one woman who shared her story. I think she's in her late 80s. She says, I'm never going to retire. That's such an outdated word. I've just rewired myself, and that's just the way it is. And then another woman called it jubilation.
Yes.
That time of jubilation. And so this is one quote. And one of the things that we enjoyed is we found all these amazing quotes that we peppered, salt and peppered in the book. And on that topic, this is one of my favorite quotes, and I'd like to read it to you. It's from the book by Diane Ackerman. She's an American poet, author, essayist, and naturalist. And she writes, I don't want to get to the end of my life and find that I have just lived the length of it. I want to have lived the width of it as well. And that is so powerful. So I want to get back to this passionate approach that both you and I and Janet have as well. You put a lot of passionate effort into your programs, Jane. How does this work on your own terms compare to when you were in the corporate life as a successful HR executive for over 30 years? How would you compare that on my own terms to being in the thick of it, using that as an example?
Well, I think you would agree, when you're doing what you love, it doesn't feel like work. So I do wake up excited every day because I can't wait to do more of what I love. I love creating art. I love creating courses. I love to talk to people about living more of their potential. I'm sure I'm working similar hours to when I was in corporate life, but now it's my passion. And so it doesn't feel like work, for sure. So let me ask you, as we wrap up, Janice, I just want to thank you so much for the inspiration that you and Janet gave me in writing your book. It's in the bibliography of my course. I really recommend it to everyone who's taking my Thriving in Retirement program, because it's not just about retirement. It's about the intersections of and choices that we make in life and the people that we connect with. So can you tell us if you have a new book on the horizon, and also how people can stay in touch with you?
Absolutely. So Janet, she's my mentor and muse and guide. And we were just talking about this the other day, as a matter of fact. after it was my first stab at writing a book, and it's hard, but I found that creative inner side of myself. As Janet says, I've got my voice. So you know what we do? We've got another book in the works.
Great.
I don't know if you call it a sequel to it, but we want this to be more of a resource, a toolkit, an expression of other stories and what we've learned. We may even go back and ask some of these women, it's been a couple of years. Has things changed? Do you see, is the magic question still the magic question? Or is it something different that you've learned? So we're definitely keen on working on a manuscript. And, our plan is to create a resource book that expands more into these ideas as we were talking about. And we're also working on a little bit of a slight revision to our current book, because we thought it might be really interesting to have a couple of pages for book club members or book
I love that plan.
and where we would ask some of those questions so people could reflect. Now, be careful what you ask for, Jane, because we might be reaching out to you to maybe collaborate with you on this book too.
Oh, that would be fabulous.
So, but where can we be reached? My Gmail address is Janice Hulse, no space, @gmail.com. You can find our book on Amazon, both in the US and in Canada. And when you do find it, you'll see Janet has a bio section, and I do, and you can reach out to us there. So yeah, we're very excited. And I am going to be doing your Thriving in Retirement.
Yes.
Okay, so done. But how can I spread the word, and how can people sign up?
So I'm going to, I think, let me see if it works. I'm just posting a link in the chat.
Okay.
Right now, for if people want to enroll, that's how they sign up. And if anybody has questions, I'm really easy to get on email. It's jane@jane-ramsey.com.
Perfect.
I do have a new cohort starting this month in the Thriving in Retirement program. The price is only $197 for this cohort. So if anything resonated with you about the course, please, you do owe it to yourself to sign up. I try to make it so that money will never be the barrier. And if people can devote about an hour a week, they can get through the program in 7 or 8 weeks. So I think it's very manageable. Mostly it's, thinking in new ways, and you can do that, doing whatever your activities are. So Janice, I just want to say an enormous thank you. And how fun was this?
This was fun, and I am so delighted to have collaborated with you today, because I just see this as the beginning, Jane. And I'm so grateful to our colleague and friend, mutual friend, Lynn, that introduced the two of us together, because you and I have talked about the power of collaboration and networking, and reaching some of those aspirations and reaffirming who we are and what we want to be. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Maybe the first of many conversations, I hope. And I want to meet Janet too.
All right, we will get that going.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jane. Have a wonderful day, and be kind and true to yourself. You will. Okay. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.